What's up, everybody? Welcome in to another edition of SSPN Postgame. Here's a little bit of a surprised edition, Ethan, because I was not expecting the Spurs to compete with the Cleveland Cavaliers. And if there was a little bit of a signal delay there to start, apologies. We've been kind of dealing with that pre-show. And of course, as soon as we started the stream, Ethan, I got the notification reconnecting. I was like, bro,
Of
are you
course.
serious? And that's kind of how I felt when Chris Paul didn't get called with a reach-in foul or a reach-in foul on him at the end of the game, as much as they were letting them play physical the whole time. The ending was definitely frustrating for Spurs fans. But all that aside, Ethan, as much as we want to see the Spurs win, and we're going to break down, the execution errors and all that stuff, I think the overall takeaway here is that this team, as much as the Cavs were without Evan Mobley, we're without Wemby and De'Aaron Fox. So the fact that this team was able to compete in this game with the best team, the best record in the NBA right now, I'm pretty satisfied.
Yeah, I was happily surprised by a competitive game tonight for sure. I jokingly told my girlfriend before the game started, I was like, yeah, we're about to get absolutely stomped. Like, this is not going to be fun. And then she was on her phone the whole game and then looked up at the fourth quarter and was like, oh my God, it's close. And then we were up for a little while there. And then obviously at the very end we lost. And she was like, well, at least it was close. And that pretty much summarizes my feelings about this game as well, Jude. And the Chris Paul thing at the very end, like, yeah, for sure. But also can't give up that many extra possessions to Cleveland late in the game. And why Bismack wasn't on the court, I honestly don't know. I know KJ had 10 rebounds. I know Julian had 7. Like we were doing a pretty good job for the most part through the first 3 quarters, but down the stretch it really hurt us that we didn't have a true big out there to help us get rebounds.
Yeah, and specifically in the fourth quarter, I think the difference was right when it was around 104. We ended up coming back a little bit because we tied it at 112, but still, when Jared Allen started taking over in the fourth
Yeah.
quarter specifically, as much as we did make a little comeback run, when it was 104 to 109, and he got, another second chance bucket that, again, as much as we fought back into it, that was the bigger issue when it comes to that Chris Paul rebound, 1,000%. And we kind of got lucky with Max Strus, I believe, who got left open in the left
Yep.
corner. It could have been another shooter. But CP3, obviously, he was trying to be aware of everything else, but he was kind of sagging off of him a little bit, which then allowed him to be in a position to get a board. But anyways, that's too in the nitty gritty. The point that I'm getting at there is I'm 100% with you. Offensive rebounds were a huge issue late in the game. And I think Jared Allen with 29 and 16 tonight, showing out in front of the former Longhorn, TJ Ford, on commentary tonight.
Right.
That was really the biggest difference and the biggest thing that I saw in the fourth quarter, which goes to your Bismack point, because as much as Bismack maybe isn't going to, and we'll talk about him overall in the game tonight because he had a really solid game overall. As much as he isn't going to stop everything that Jarrett Allen does, he would have done better probably physically than anybody else we had on the floor.
He played really well in the 15 minutes that he had. In the first 3 quarters, what's funny is they showed a stat. We were actually winning the offensive rebound battle for a majority of the game. And we actually won it, overall, but I'd like to see the differential in the fourth quarter. I don't have that stat in front of me, but it definitely felt like that we were losing that competition late in that fourth quarter.
Yeah, 100%. Again, apologies if the connection is a little off here. That was kind of cutting in and out there for me. So doing my best. But definitely, as we can see, Stefon Castle, a really solid game. Devin Vassell, another really solid game from him as well. Another thing that I did not realize, and we probably haven't been harping on the past couple weeks. One, last episode when we were talking about Devin, as much as we were seeing some strides, we mentioned how there was still a little bit of inconsistency offensively. Obviously, that's changed in the past week. And I think when you look over at just the overall month of March I sent you a tweet, he broke a Spurs record for the most threes in a month this season. And I sent you that. That was 47. I believe he hit one more after that, maybe 2. I could be mistaken there. So it's either 48 or 49 in total, breaking Danny Green's past record of 45. So he's definitely responded, not just offensively, Ethan, but the last episode, this is what I was going to talk about as well. People were mentioning he's been playing really good on defense. And it's a two-way game. And maybe really good is an exaggeration, but for where Devin was at, he has been much more impactful consistently on the defensive end of the floor tonight. Even though it's just one steal, you saw him getting his hands in passing lanes. TJ Ford harped on the active hands for the whole team all night long. So I think we've really been seeing some strides on both sides of the floor from Devin. He's been killing it in March, and as much as there was a lot of inconsistency, right after in that the past 2 weeks of February, after the trade deadline and after Wemby got shut down and everything like that. We got to give him his props. And I understand, I can already hear it. Okay, well, De'Aaron Fox is out. Now we're putting the ball in his hands, so he's able to create a little bit more. But when he goes back to that off-ball role, is he going to be as impactful? That's a fair question. But at the end of the day, Ethan, like, these are regular season games. I was thinking about this with you because I understand all of the context. You can make the same argument for Keldon if you want to, like, oh, he scores a lot when, it's on a bad team that's not winning games. But again, man, they went toe-to-toe with the Cavs tonight. I got to give some sort of value to these regular season games. They still are happening. They're real reps against real teams and real games late in the season. So I got to give Devin credit. It is my main overall point there. And again, apologies if I didn't necessarily just respond to everything that you said in that last statement, but my internet was cutting out there, so I didn't hear all of it.
No, you're good, dude. You did. And to touch on Devin, yes, he's had a really, really solid March. I think 25 and 3 are his split averages on 48 and 41 and 87% shooting splits. And I understand the idea that this only happens when obviously Wemby isn't playing and De'Aaron Fox is not playing. So he's going to have the ball in his hands more, like you're saying. And I understand that to an extent, maybe with his 2-point percentage, but from what I've seen, his 3-point shots have all still been off-ball shots. They've been catch-and-shoot shots, which are what he's getting with Wemby and De'Aaron Fox. They're just not being passed to him by those two guys. It's from different players, and he's still shooting 41% from 3 in this month, on roughly 8 attempts per game. So those are really good numbers from him. We have to give him props in that regard because February was abysmal, and we talked about that at length.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're going to be as hard as we were on him in February, we got to be as positive on him in March. And then tonight against Cleveland, it was more of that, 40% from 3, perfect from the free throw line. And offensively, it was definitely run through him and Stefon Castle. That was the tandem tonight. And you had guys play off of them very well. I thought KJ, Julian, and Jeremy played really well off of those guys. But as far as who was creating the offense, who was initiating looks for everybody else, it was Devin Vassell and it was Stefon Castle, who almost had a triple-double with 22, 11 boards, and 8 assists tonight as well.
Yeah, man. I feel like almost at this point of the season, we kind of gloss over Steph because we just see his potential and like we know who he is. Like we're just expecting this from him. And that's crazy to think for a rookie that we're almost like, oh yeah, 22, 11, and 8. That's normal Steph, So that's just a testament to his potential long term. I'm so glad we drafted him. I know we've said that all season, but as we wind down to kind of the end of the season here, man, I'm just so thankful to have him a part of the Spurs future. And here's another thing, man. I know he's one guy, and let me preface this. Chip England is the best shooting coach in the NBA. Not questioning that whatsoever. Look at what the Thunder have done. But I think Stefon Castle is an example of how the Spurs can still develop a jump shot throughout a season.
Oh, 100%. And a lot of that, you got to give him credit too, to his individual work ethic. I think that is clearly been a positive from someone who's only 19 years old. And just to say it, because I know somebody will, he did shoot 37% from the field tonight and 40% from 3. But it was the way that he was attacking the rim, putting pressure on Cleveland's defense, and then finding open guys as well. And I felt like his shots were within a run and to improve on a momentous stretch for the Spurs. It was his ability to slow down in transition and get easy baskets and get and one plays. 2 for 6 from the free throw line, obviously not great. But I still think the sentiment of being aggressive and putting pressure on the rim ranged true for Stefon Castle. Can you hear me, Jude?
Alrighty, man. I'm so sorry, but my internet is just completely pooping it.
You're going a little blurry. Can you hear me now?
Oh my goodness. Okay, I think I'm back, dude.
Did you hear the Stefon
I'm
Castle?
so sorry about. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I heard most of it. It was kinda dude, it was I don't know what's going on with my internet today. I've
You're
tried
good, man.
different things. It usually we had this a couple nights or a couple weeks ago where this, happened where you could still hear me, but, like, my voice wasn't matching with my face, but tonight it's just getting real screwed up. I honestly heard a lot of robotic stuff, but I got what you were getting at with Steph there. And again, the main point that I was getting at, especially when you talk about his inefficiency, because, you can look and see 9 for 24. Kind of going back to the Chris Paul point, and this was kind of the caveat on top of, the offensive rebounding point that you mentioned. They were letting him play tonight. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of Steph's misses at the rim through contact. I mean, you saw him putting his hands up at multiple times tonight, throughout the game. I think in other games where it's just I'm not even upset with the refs tonight because they were consistent. Like, that's all I can ask. As long as you're doing that on both sides, I'm not mad at it. Um, but I think in other games, Steph would have got to the line even more than he did tonight.
That's definitely a fair point. It was a physical game the entire time.
Yeah. Man, there's a couple different guys that we can go over. I want to talk about Julian Champagnie. I know he's only 4 for 13 tonight, man, but you see him at 5 for 5 from the free throw line. The threes that he did hit when he got hot were very timely in keeping us in the game. Still 16 overall. But here's the other thing I noticed from him tonight: 7 boards. You saw him getting some putbacks. I saw
Mhm.
Keldon being a ball handler where he was kind of being the pick and roll man or the pick and pop guy. We got to remember that Julian Champagnie, so many people come in here and say, like, oh, well, this website says he's listed here. This is where the NBA says he's 6'7", 6'8", whatever you want to go with, just roll with it. Um, he's somebody who has, as much as he's not the physical specimen to play the four, he does have the height and length to play the four. So if we can see, just continued rebounding, again, this is just one game, but
Mhm.
when I'm thinking about next season's roster, obviously the offseason and how the draft goes are a huge part of that. Um, but with the way Champagnie's playing, I think he's proven that he is definitely, I feel like I'm repeating myself here with him and Mamu, but I think it could be worthy of rotation minutes. I would prefer him to be a third string, but I wouldn't be mad at that. So the fact that he's showing some rebounding and cleaning up and showing some pick and roll skills where he could maybe be slid into the four a little bit more moving forward, I think that just adds to his versatility. And also, more importantly, just because of the lack of front court depth that we have. And maybe that's a circumstantial thing for this season. But when you go into next year, Julian's going to be a very experienced Spur. I would not be mad at him and Keldon being the forwards off the bench.
Yeah, I think, obviously he's not hopefully the long-term solution at backup 3 or even, starting fill-in 3, but I think he is the perfect plug-and-play guy. And situationally, he has been fantastic for us at different points in the season. He started a lot of games October, November, December, and he was fantastic. Like, there were moments where we were talking about him being like the fourth best guy on the court, because of his ability to hit the three-point shot. And he did tail off in January, February, and a little bit here in March. But I think he's a guy that you can fill in the starting lineup and not really lose anything, just be a 3 and D floor spacer. But he's also a guy who can do pretty much the same thing off the bench and provides a little bit of versatility, like you're saying, where you can play him 2, 3, or 4 depending on matchups and depending on injuries. But I agree, if we can find a better replacement and bring him in that third unit, that would be probably the best place for Julian Champagnie.
Yeah, 100% agree. Just at this point of the season, we're trying to find, new nooks and crannies of, okay, hey, maybe how could this apply to the team? And that's just, I think we have seen this year, him rebounding a little bit more. I guess I haven't seen the exact numbers, so I say that, and who knows what if there's really been a jump or anything like that. But it feels like it has from the eye test. But
Mm.
with that being said, we can move on to Keldon Johnson. He was definitely an impact on the boards tonight. I know not the greatest three-point shooting night from him, not the most efficient night either. And I was curious what the box score was going to look like because when I was watching this, I was like, I could see a lot of people being frustrated with Keldon, but he just kept making plays. He had 2 steals tonight as well. I know he hasn't been shooting as efficient over the past couple games, so I still think this is a bounce back game for him. You love to see the 10 boards and another game with 2 steals, and that's another thing I've been noticing, even in the recent games, which I wasn't able to catch all of them over the weekend and whatnot. But even where he wasn't shooting well, I've been seeing steals and blocks show up on the box score. So again, I think there's been a little bit of a tail off for Keldon. We're not going to, just sit here and say, oh, it's the same thing we've been seeing, 2 weeks ago when we were talking about it. But the fact that he had a game like this tonight after those is, again, just another positive sign. And this kind of gets me into the Devin Keldon conversation, Ethan. And I know, again, it's like we talk about this every week, and I don't just want to repeat myself every time. But more and more as this season has gone on, if we can continue to see this consistent play until the end of the season, I at least want to give them, and I'm going to trust the Spurs front office. If they make a move this offseason, I'm going to believe in that. But me personally, I want to wait. I want to give them until at least next year's trade deadline. And if we come out next season, and Devin and Keldon, it just reverts to the same thing we saw at the earlier in the year. They can't find their shot without the ball in their hands. They're not able to get comfortable and be consistent 3-point shooters. Then at that point, I'll be like, hey, it's just going to be a better fit somewhere else. Let's get some value for these guys. But especially like you said, with what Devin is showing off the ball, I think even what we've seen from Keldon off the ball shooting, I know tonight isn't the greatest example of that, but still just his overall improved play and intensity. We've seen multiple 10 rebound games since the All-Star break. On top of all those efficiency stats that we were seeing a couple weeks ago, I know those have probably tailed off. But that's kind of my thoughts on those guys just as the season has progressed. Maybe in 2 weeks, if we have another 2 weeks of bad performances, I might change my mind on that. But with Devin's improved consistency and then another bounce back game from Keldon, that's kind of where I'm at with both of those guys right now.
Yeah, statistically, it's still his best month of the year. If you just kind of accumulate everything. However, efficiency is just like 3% down compared to last month in February, but he's also taking a couple more shots a game. So I think we're really just getting lost in the detail here with Keldon Johnson. I thought it was a good game personally. The first quarter and a half were real rough. He was cold from deep, and he was seemingly only taking threes. But as soon as he decided to take it inside and attack the basket, things opened up for him, and that's when he did hit. His only three was after that little stretch where he got a couple baskets inside. I think Keldon Johnson is a valuable piece.
I agree.
However, I don't think he'll be anything more than a 13 to 15 point a game guy for the rest of his career. And that's being generous. I think he's started
Yeah.
off rough this year for sure, especially efficiency wise from deep. If he can keep it at 37 to 40% and get to that 13 to 15 points per game mark, I think that is good for Keldon Johnson. Now the question becomes, is that a fit for the team? And that's a definite
Yeah.
conversation we can have moving forward. But if you're just going to analyze, since Wemby's been hurt, or let's go to All-Star break to now, and just like in a vacuum, you have to say Keldon's been playing well.
Yeah.
Objectively, he has been playing well. But we also cannot avoid the fact that he doesn't play as well next to Victor Wembanyama. But with that being said, I'm still on board for Keldon Johnson. I'm still a huge fan of him. I have his jersey back there. I love the energy that he brings. I love the way that he plays. I love when he screams and yells and he gets
His
guys riled up.
personality.
He's
Yeah.
very much a Spurs guy. He's a tenured guy. He's a leader on the team. So let's give him again the start of next year. And if we want to talk about bringing up a trade for him, let's analyze that at the All-Star break. That's my opinion. And I do think that he will play better with De'Aaron Fox full time on the court as well, because they had some nice chemistry together before De'Aaron went out. And I don't think we have a large enough sample size to really give that a full look.
Yeah, and the other thing is overall, we feel like the roster is going to be better this next season. Even
Yep.
if we don't make a big trade and we keep both of those guys with the draft additions, maybe a free agency signing here or there, the better talent could also put both of those guys in better positions to succeed next year. The last thing I'll mention about Keldon, we were running this lineup. I believe it was Jeremy, Julian, Devin, Keldon, and Blake. And we were having Keldon kind of be almost like the point guard for a couple
Yeah.
possessions in a row. And I really liked that. Now, again, I don't want him to be a full-time point guard, but I do not mind letting Keldon be the pick and roll ball handler, or not even just a pick and roll ball handler, although we did see that when he was out there, but just being the primary ball handler and driving towards the rim because he attracts a lot of attention. It can create open space for other shooters. We saw Julian come in and get some cleanup. But again, it's like that opportunity isn't even there if Keldon doesn't, drive to the basket and get as close as he does. He also made a ton of tough shots, as much as every single, one didn't go in. But it was kind of reminiscent to the way that Stefon attacks the rim. And obviously Keldon's been doing it, a lot longer in his career, but having that physicality and rim pressure from like a perimeter player in the starting rotation and the backup rotation, I think it's really beneficial to the Spurs offense overall.
I agree. I do like when he takes ball handling responsibilities at times. I know there's a fine line for Keldon because when he starts
Right.
getting
Not high
going,
usage.
yeah, when he starts getting going and he starts to feel confident, it's almost like, okay, give me the ball back because then he becomes way too aggressive and starts
Yeah.
turning the ball over, right, and creating bad shots. But when he's being conservative and when he's taking his time and playing calm under pressure, he makes positive plays for the rest of the team, and he has really nice touch around the rim. So I like that as well.
Not to harp on this forever, but one more thing to hit on that point specifically. As much as I 1000% agree with you, the reason I'm harping on it tonight is because I think there was a possession where he just, drove to the rim, got a crazy, Keldon basket, in traffic where he falls on the ground and gets back up and sprints back on defense. And then he gets the rebound again.
Right.
In 2022, my man is sprinting to the other side of the court. You know what I mean?
Oh
Not
yeah.
even considering anything, and he slows it down. He's still, like he's not too slow to where he's, um, it's still a transition opportunity, but he's aware of everybody else and dishes this beautiful pass to Jeremy on a bounce pass. Jeremy ends up missing the layup, but still, when I saw that, I was like, that's growth from Keldon. Like that's Keldon, you can't call him a ball hog right there because
Right.
he had all the opportunity and all the momentum and even probably the go ahead from his teammates and coaches to go drive towards the rim again after that. And he chose to give a bounce pass to Jeremy. Again, execution wasn't there, but I like the thought there. But enough on Keldon. Let's talk about another big man who was rebounding a ton tonight. David Delgado asks, is Bismack on a minutes restriction? And that's a pretty good point because dude was going off. Like my man had a
Yeah.
poster on Jared Allen earlier, and it was like two dudes.
Yeah, he was playing really, really well, especially in that first half. But he only had 15 minutes. 4 for 5 from the field. He had what was it, 8 points, 6 boards, a couple of blocks, high energy. There was a moment there, like a few possessions in a row, where he was single-handedly keeping us alive with offensive
Mm-hmm.
rebounds. Like we had like multiple possessions where we got extra chances at the basket, and that was all Bismack Biyombo. We talked about it a little bit at the beginning. I don't really know why we didn't continue to play him. I know he's 32, but like that's not that old. Like surely he can keep going. I think Mitch just maybe likes the small ball lineup and thought maybe that would give us an advantage if we were shooting well against Cleveland, but we obviously cooled off a little bit from deep in that fourth quarter, and then we're murdered on the offensive rebounds by Jared Allen. So I'm in agreement that we should continue to play Bismack because he makes positive plays.
Yeah, I think the one other aspect that I would throw in there is we probably just want to play Jeremy Sochan more than him. Just long term, reps wise. Obviously, matchup wise, if we're talking about winning the game today, Bismack is the better option. But I think they're just, they want
Mhm.
to play Jeremy more because they want to play the guys that they see in the future. Like we're not even sure if Bismack is going to be back next season. So I think that kind of plays into it a little bit. But here's the other thing I'll say about Bismack, dude. Bismack's 6'8", 250, right? Or
Right.
255, whatever. That should tell you, man, when you look at the guys in the upcoming draft, even the ones that are listed at 6'10", like if this is what Bismack can do for us, if we could just get a physical presence, like that's all we need. I saw some more highlights of Georgetown center, Thomas Sorber. I had only really looked at like his last 3 games. We talked about him, and that was like the first time we'd ever really even looked into him when we were on the show. So that's an option, but it's not just him. We've got multiple options for bigs moving forward, but he's just a guy who's 6'10", 255. Like that, I was thinking about Bismack. Okay, if I have any height concerns with some of these young guys, let me think about what Bismack's been able to do, and that can kind of mitigate that a little bit. There's always going to be rookie adjustments and whatnot. But I think he's an example of, we really don't need that much to accomplish and fix, that big issue in the backup center position.
Right. Agreed.
Let's see. Muhammad says Bismack and Jeremy not in the last 6 minutes were the reason Jared Allen feasted in the paint. And that's
Yep.
the last person I wanted to talk about today, Ethan. We can maybe, harp on Chris Paul and Harrison here in tandem to end it off. But Jeremy Sochan, what were your thoughts on him tonight?
I liked what I saw from Jeremy. Obviously, not the efficient game offensively that we would have hoped at following the it wasn't Detroit where he feasted, it was against Toronto that he had a really good
Mm-hmm.
offensive game. So obviously he's down from that, 5 of 12 from the field, only 13 points, but he does Jeremy things. I will say that defensively this is probably one of the weaker performances, I would say, as far as defending Donovan Mitchell. This is just an eye test. I don't even know how Donovan performed. How many points did he have? He had
25
25
and
plus
14.
6 from the field. It never felt like he was struggling though when Jeremy
Yeah,
was guarding him, and that's unusual. I feel like
facts.
Jeremy really puts stars in an uncomfortable position, and Donovan was not having a difficult time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. And I noticed that. And when I saw him on him, I was like, I'm glad we made that decision. But to your point, he was able to still go off. Now, as much as we do need to criticize Jeremy there because we've put him on guys like Luka Doncic, we've put him on guys like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and as much
Mhm.
as he hasn't stopped them completely, we've seen him individually, possession by possession, here or there, every 3 or 4 possessions, make a play and frustrate him. You didn't really see that much tonight, but you also have to give the Cavs like some sort of credit there, especially like he was having to fight over a lot of those Jared Allen screens.
He was.
Again, when we get to the playoffs long term, those are things you're going to have to do. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
100%. But still, overall, I thought this was a really solid game from Jeremy, or maybe not really solid, but a solid game from Jeremy. And I think the bigger thing for me is we've kind of just been seeing him consistently kind of play this role. I know there were like 2 out of the last 3 games where, it wasn't that great, kind of similar to Keldon with the numbers, but it also wasn't like, that bad. He wasn't shooting as inefficient as Keldon. I think maybe one of the games he might have went like 1 for 7 or something like that.
Mhm.
So like I acknowledge that, but I still think overall, especially since as much as we don't see him as a center long term, him playing that center kind of cleanup role, again, it just makes his life easier. So
Yeah.
as much as he's not going to be a center long term, ideally off the bench, at least in my opinion, I do think that him playing this role will kind of, it's just preparing him to get back to what he was doing at the beginning of the season when he was going off so much next to Wemby. And I know, obviously, you got to give credit to the guys who were on the floor, like a Victor, because he's a huge part of giving Jeremy those looks. But you've also got to give Jeremy the credit for executing with so many, 17 and 15, 17, 14 type games at the beginning of the year. And so I think he's getting back to that a little bit. Obviously, it's not as much because of the scenario in the backup rotations as of right now. But I'm just glad he's playing that role more because I think that's what he's going to do long term.
That is fair. That is fair. I'll give you that.
But again, not usually we see a little bit more aggressiveness from Jeremy on that perimeter defense. So I would like to see that return a little bit and see, we didn't really see a lot of attitude from him tonight either. I didn't even think about that. We usually see that.
Yeah, maybe a couple moments between him and what's old boy's name? I'll just look at the roster here.
Dean Wade.
DeAndre Hunter.
Not Dean Wade.
No, not Dean Wade. A little bit of DeAndre Hunter, but nothing significant.
Yeah, yeah. But again, not a horrible game
No,
from
not
Jeremy by
not
any
in the
means.
way. Anyway, yeah.
Any final thoughts on this one, Ethan?
No, sir. I thought it was a pretty. I guess yes, sir. I'm glad it was a competitive game considering who Cleveland is, but we also have to remember no Evan Mobley and no what's what the dude's name, the point guard off the bench.
Um,
He's like a 6 man of the year candidate for Cleveland.
really? Wow, I'm showing my NBA ignorance. I went and looked at the
Ty
is it
Jerome.
Ty Jerome? That's right.
Ty
Okay.
Jerome and no
Yeah.
Evan Mobley. So not
He's been
exactly the
going off. That is
yeah,
right.
not their full team, but I'm still pleased that we were able to do what we did. And really, it came down to the very end of the fourth quarter. We had a chance the entire time, so I was really happy with the overall energy and effort from the guys. It was just late game execution that really bit us.
Yeah. Again, we don't want to normalize losing. We don't want to make excuses for it. But as much and Ty Jerome and Evan Mobley being out are huge, but so is Fox and Wemby. I'm not saying that's completely equal because I think a lot of these same issues would have still showed up even if they were on the floor. But again, I think considering the guys we put out there, this is a
Yeah,
pretty good showing against the team with the best record in the NBA.
100%.
Okay, before we leave you guys today, we're just going to do a little bit of a March Madness update because we do have some games going on right now as we speak. Derek Queen, he's the first guy we'll look at. Obviously, Florida did fall in this one tonight. He had 27. 10 for 10 from the free throw line with 2 steals as well, 1 for 4 from 3. So good to see him in the scoring end. Here's the one thing I will say, Ethan. He's at 5 boards. That's kind of what we talked about in the last game that we went over. I think it was 2 weeks ago or a week ago when we talked about him last, where when he matched up with Danny Wolf, who's a potential guy that we could get at potentially 16 with the Hawks pick in the draft this season. When he matched up against him, he got like 3 boards, and Danny Wolf, who's a 7-footer, had like 21 and 13. So tonight, as much as he had 27, and I do want to give him credit for that, and I think he's continued to show his scoring ability. He just hit a buzzer beater. He showed his clutch gene against Colorado State last round. Here's Ruben Chenyelu, who's probably not going to be an NBA prospect. He's got 8 boards tonight. And then Thomas Haw, a 6'9", 210 guy from Pennsylvania. No hate to Pennsylvania, but I'm just trying to kind of give you an example. Probably not going to be an NBA player. Maybe he becomes a G Leaguer at some point with 9 boards. That's the one thing I am kind of noticing with Derek Queen, but I still think that even with that being an issue, Ethan, I still think just having somebody that's 6'10", 250 would be an upgrade in that sense. But rebounding is my question for him.
Fair question. I'm curious, and this is a genuine question for you and maybe people in the comments that are more familiar with his game. Is he just a future version of the dude from Minnesota, the backup center?
Naz Reid?
Naz Reid. Is that who he's going to have a similar game to?
So actually, I can speak on that because that was the last time LSU basketball was good. Was
Okay.
Naz Reid, Cam Thomas? I don't think so because like there are some similarities in that they're scoring, but I would say that Naz is much more physical and didn't have as many rebounding questions.
Mm. Okay. Fair point. I was just
But
curious because I feel like everyone only talks about his offensive, like a scoring ability when we talk about Derek
right.
Queen.
Yeah, well, and that's a fair. So there is definitely that parallel for sure. But he did have 2 steals tonight. But yeah, the rebounding in big games, that's kind of my biggest question there. But don't want to go on too long here. But we will go on to the other game that is already finished. Kaman Malwatch and Duke are playing right now with Cooper Flag. So that's 8-8, as you guys can see. And man, Alabama went crazy today, Ethan. They broke an
Goodness.
NCAA tournament record for threes with 25 on 49% shooting. And look at Mark Sears down here, dude. So he is, I would compare him to like a Jalen Brunson type player in the sense that Jalen played 4 years in college. It's hard. Because I could see like maybe he makes that Jalen Brunson route and actually does turn into something because I think he's a pretty skilled guy. But also I think if I'm just giving my opinion and maybe I'll be wrong here, I think probably he'll be like more of a backup, like a 6-man type guy is probably his ceiling. But I think he's a name to watch in that second round. If we want to get another backup point guard, I definitely would be looking at that. He's played with Alabama, has had clutch moments in the tournament last season as well as this year. You see with this game just going absolutely insane. And let me see here so he's listed at 6'1", 190. He might measure a little bit shorter than that at the combine. We'll have to see what that looks like. Yeah, I mean, I could even maybe see him like measure at like 5'11". We'll have to see. But anyways, he's actually not the main guy I wanted to talk about here, Ethan, but I had to mention it just with him going 10 for 16 tonight and having 34 and 8 with 3 steals. But Igor Demon up here, I know he went 1 for 8 from 3. That's probably one of his worst shooting nights from 3 of the season. But he is somebody that definitely could be in the Spurs range. He's a 6'9" Russian kind of point guard. And you see that with the 7 assists. And obviously 15 points, has some scoring ability. I know we're pulling up this box score, Ethan, but I'm telling you, he's a solid 3-point shooter. And that's what makes him really intriguing because of his height and his shooting ability and obviously the connectivity with the passing skills. I think almost like he could be a guy who could solve two problems for us at once. Like, and maybe he's very slender. So I don't really think he's a natural four, but I think kind of in the sense like Julian playing next to Keldon when I was talking about that earlier. Also, I think Igor has a lot of potential to kind of develop physically because he's so young. The point I'm trying to get at is I think he could be a point forward at the 4 spot maybe, or even at the 3 next to Keldon, but his height and length will kind of mitigate Keldon's, size disadvantage at the 4 if we wanted to play him there. Again, I'm getting real deep into the weeds here, but I think he is definitely somebody that the Spurs could consider at 9 or 16. He's kind of a wild card just because of his positionlessness. But as much as this wasn't the greatest shooting night from him, here's what I will say, Ethan, and they kind of got dog walked in this game. I bet on him tonight. I bet on his points, rebounds, and assists over, and it was not looking good in the first half, and he ended up hitting it in the second half. So I got to give him credit that he was able to at least bounce back in the second half, even though, it was kind of a dominant performance from Alabama.
I'm intrigued. I'm a big versatility guy, people that can make plays for others. I cannot lie to you. Still have not watched a single college basketball game because I'm going to say it, and I'm probably going to get hate for it, Jude. I hate college basketball.
It's okay.
But I trust your opinion of college basketball prospects, Jude. So I'm with you. However, I will say this: we don't need a backup point guard because we got Blake Wesley.
Okay.
And we also don't need a third string point guard because we got my guy Juan Nunez just cooking overseas, waiting for his chance.
We've been talking about, I'm so glad you brought that up. I was messaging with one of my other Spurs fan friends, and he was like, who's that guy we got in Spain? What's his name? I was like, oh, yeah, that's right. You're right.
Juan Nunez, baby.
But Igor Demon, the next Aaron Gordon, Draymond, except he's a sniper.
I like that. That would mean we have like 3 different Draymond-esque guys. Is it Jeremy? Who else? Isn't there another guy on our team that we always compare to Draymond?
Would you say Mamu, maybe?
Man, not really.
Not
yeah. Really.
Oh, my goodness. Well, anyways, with that being said, genuinely, all jokes aside, I do really like Igor Demon as a prospect for the Spurs. It's going to be interesting to see where he falls. And I think... Dang it, wrong thing here. I clicked on BYU overall. And obviously Derek Queen is a name to watch as well. But looking into tomorrow night, Danny Wolf, definitely watch him against Auburn. Johnny Broome is another name to watch as well. He's Auburn center. He's another guy who's kind of a 4-year guy, kind of in that same mold as Mark Sears that I was mentioning earlier for Alabama. But again, in the second round, he could be a huge value pick. Like I think Johnny Broome could come in and maybe immediately be a backup center. But I definitely would prefer Danny Wolf over him. And I think we could get him at 16. But those are really the only 2 guys when I look at this tomorrow that I would pay attention to. Maybe Jace Richardson is another name from Michigan State, but I just don't feel like we're going to go with another point guard, especially with Steph Castle. And we didn't talk as much about Blake Wesley today, but even though tonight was not a great game from him, over the past 3 games that we missed, we've been seeing some solid stuff.
Yeah. Blake Wesley's my guy for the rest of time. So not a great game tonight, objectively. I can admit that. But he will be the best backup point guard the Spurs have ever had.
You heard it here first.
That's a fact.
Last name I'll mention, I know Million Gnu says, I want Asa on the team. MEZ says Asa Newell. That's definitely somebody that I would also consider at that 9 spot or wherever the Spurs end up falling. We were just kind of going over the teams that are playing in March Madness here. But we're going to go ahead and wrap that up, y'all. We appreciate all of you guys for hanging out with us tonight. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to hit that like and that subscribe button below. If you want to stay updated with the channel, hit the notification bell. Follow us on X or Twitter at SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero. We appreciate you guys. We'll catch y'all in the next one. Go Spurs, go.